The fallout continues after explosive allegations from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that the agents of the Indian government may have been involved in the assassination of the separatist in Surrey, BC, a Khalistani separatist, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Warren Kinsella. Warren, I want to start with you. This is a really significant moment, certainly in the political space, what's going on in the world, geopolitical issues. I know that there are so many ramifications. You have been in a position of working on Parliament Hill. You have worked in prime ministers' offices. You have been in an environment where an accusation and a charge such as this has to show, there has to be credible evidence. There has to be a lot of intelligence behind this. So as you see things sort of, the explosive allegation comes earlier this week, the narrative in some ways is shifting a bit from India needs to answer to this to Trudeau needs to show evidence. What say you?
Well, in one sense, I feel a little bit sorry for him because the same people who were saying, he needed to disclose evidence of Chinese interference are now mad at him for disclosing evidence of Indian wrongdoing. So you kind of, it's politics, you can't win. But, when I worked for a prime minister, Mr. Chrétien, but before us, Martin and Harper, and and Trudeau's father, like Canada has never been in as difficult a position internationally as it is right now. We've got China not just mad at us, they're hostile towards us. So is India. And it's significant. India is the biggest democracy in the world. China is the biggest manufacturer in the world. And it would almost be nice if we could have somebody who's a smaller country who's mad at us for the time being. So the difficulty the Trudeau guys have got, and perhaps they've gotten themselves into, is how does a small country like Canada, because we are in comparative terms, how do we deal with this? How do we fight back? And honest to God, guys, I don't know the answer. If India says go pound sand, as we look for evidence into the killing of this man in Surrey, I don't know where we go after that. So I think Trudeau's kind of out on a limb, and I don't know how he's going to get back out.
Brian, I don't think that anybody would disagree that if there is legitimate examples and evidence that agents of the Indian government, and that is a very broad term in and of itself. I mean, agents of the Indian government were involved in the assassination of Nijjar on Canadian soil.
We must know who performed the assassination and who was behind the assassination. Conservatives will continue to work to get these answers.
Of a Canadian citizen, we can quibble about how his route to this country, how that was very windy and questionable at the very least. But regardless of that, no one is going to disagree that the prime minister was in the wrong to put this charge out there, to put these put this out there and say, look, this is a very serious issue. No one's been more critical of Justin Trudeau on any of his India trips or really anything that his government does than the Sun. But we know this recent trip to India, there were issues and we were very critical of it. Perhaps does this now explain some of that discomfort, shall we say?
Oh, it absolutely explains it. And yeah, we were tough. I wrote tough columns about that trip to India because it was another trip that turned into a disaster. And as Warren said, major economy. We've just launched our Indo-Pacific strategy. The Prime Minister was talking about that strategy while he was there. And I don't know how you have an Indo-Pacific strategy to expand Canada's trade and diplomatic efforts in the world when the two biggest players in the region, two fastest growing economies, are angry at you, furious with you. But, if the allegations against India are true, and we have to keep couching it in those terms because the government does, then India has to answer for it. The reason that I think that Prime Minister Trudeau has to put some evidence in the window is that we don't really have our allies giving a full-throated defense of us right now. They're not coming to our aid. In fact, Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, just put out a statement saying how he will not stand for Khalistani extremism in Britain, and that he is working with India to stamp it out. He's making those statements because he's trying to get a trade deal. Joe Biden mentioned India 3 times at the United Nations speech. Not once did he mention Canada. Not once did he mention our troubles. Then he puts out, his Defense Department puts out a big statement about their strong ties with India. Everyone is trying to get these strong ties with India. We can't ignore the fact that we need to grow with India economically, but that doesn't mean you ignore what's happened here. So put the evidence in the window so that it gives something for our allies to stand up and say, look, Mr. Modi, you've got to deal with this. Did Modi order the hit? Did someone in his security administration order the hit? Who are the agents of the Indian government? You don't have to expose the whole case, but he does need to put something out there to force Modi's hand to get our allies speaking up for us.
Well, let me put this to the lawyer of the group with the most beautiful background that we have with the lake behind him. I mean, Warren, I think there is something to be said about, obviously, you need to keep your evidence tight and locked down and methodical when you are going to potentially go to a trial, for example. But is there something to what is being said? Putting something in the window. You now see even the opposition leaders saying, we need to hear something. We need to see something.
Call on the Indian government to act with utmost transparency as authorities investigate this murder.
What of that notion?
Well, yeah, you know, like I said, Trudeau's betwixt and between. Like on Monday, he did the right thing. He reached out in advance of his public statement to Pierre Poilievre of the Conservatives and Jagmeet Singh of the New Democrats and said, here's what we've got. I'm going to make a statement. Poilievre came up with an excellent statement that said, I think, what is my view, which is we're all Canadians. And we, you know, notwithstanding what we think about this man, whether he was dislikable or what have you, you are not allowed to come to our country and murder one of our citizens in cold blood. You're not allowed to do that. We don't care how big you are. So that's been good. But yes, I think Poilievre and Singh and others are right to say, okay, we're now out here on this limb with you, Mr. Trudeau. Do we have any kind of evidence that we can share publicly that won't impair the police investigation, because it is being investigated by the RCMP and others? Is there anything that we can show to the world? Because as Brian pointed out, we've not had a full-throated defense by our allies. I mean, yesterday, Australia said, you know, they were concerned. They said they've raised the matter with the Indians. They didn't disclose how the Indians responded. But you know, nobody's been rushing to our defense. And as Brian also pointed out, you know, Biden's been sucking up to the Indians for quite some time in order to offset the influence of the Chinese. So like, once again, we're a small country stuck between these giants, these elephants, if you will. And like Justin's father used to say, you know, when you're a mouse and you're surrounded by elephants, you know, most of the time your job is just to avoid getting stepped on.
Yeah. Brian, last word to you. No question the Indian government has come out with a very full-throated response, to the point where there seems to be some sort of daily communique to Indians living in Canada, the diaspora, or even students that are coming here, studying here, which we have thousands of. They are saying, you know, watch out for your safety. I mean, this is their response, fairly or not, whereas Canada now has sort of hunkered down and not said anything further.
The claim by India that their citizens are in danger, that members of the Indian diaspora are in danger in Canada, is beyond ridiculous. The only people that are in danger are actually members of the Indian diplomatic corps, who have had threats put out by them, against them, by supporters of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And and members of the extreme members of the Khalistani group. So, you know, if you haven't seen, they've had their faces put out there on posters calling them killers, asking for their home addresses, and basically telling people, go get them. The average person, you know, of Indian descent in Canada is not in danger. Adrienne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're just fine. So that's a bit of a stretch by India. Canada, I think, does need to start taking Khalistani extremism seriously. We have allowed it to bubble up again. It was a big issue in the 80s and 90s, kind of waned for a while. Now it's coming back up. The extremist elements need to be dealt with. That doesn't mean that you can't support a Khalistani homeland. You can't hope for that. But just like we cracked down on people that were fundraising for the IRA in Canada back in the 80s and 90s, we can do that here. If you're funding terrorism, you should be charged. And as far as India goes, look, if you want to know how they should have handled this, look at the case of Tawinder Hussain Rana. He is a Canadian who went to jail for terrorist activities in the States, and India believes he was behind the 2008 Mumbai terrorist attack. They're still trying to extradite him. That's how democracies deal with this, through the courts, through the legal process, through extradition, and put him on trial in your own courts. That's what they should have done with Nijjar. If they carried out an extrajudicial killing, then somebody needs to answer for that.
Well, and we'll see if we get any more answers or any evidence, as you say, put in the window, and the fallout will be ongoing. Go to theTorontoSun.com, hit that subscribe button. You're going to find more information on stories like this and coverage you will not find anywhere else.